This morning we are with Consul General of Ireland, Orla McBreen. She's based in Chicago and she represents the Midwest, Ireland in the Midwest. Good morning, Orla. Great to have you with us.
Good morning, Jerry. Do you wish your imagine?
Yes, indeed. Now, Orla, this is not your first visit to Cleveland, is it?
No, I had the great pleasure of being here in October for the Mayo Ball, which was my first time here, and I really enjoyed it. And I didn't know before I got to the US just how strong the connection was between Mayo and Cleveland, and especially Achill Island and Cleveland. So that was a revelation for me.
You didn't even know there was this many people in Mayo, or you came out of Mayo, right?
Possibly. The only thing I'd heard about was Nancy Kerrigan, the aviator who came from Achill Island.
Nancy Corrigan, that's
yeah.
right, that's right.
I knew about her.
Yeah. Where were you born?
I was born in County Meath, in a small place called Trim, County Meath, so north of Dublin.
It's not too far from Dublin, is it?
No, it's only about an hour out.
I remember the old days it was a long distance. Today it's only, people live in Meath and work in Dublin, don't they?
That's true, actually, yeah. When I was a kid, it probably took us 2.5 hours to drive to the city, and you could do it in an hour nowadays.
Now, did you go to the local school in Trim?
I did. I went to the local national primary school there, St Mary's, and then when I was 11 we moved house to Dunboyne, so we moved all of 17 miles, not very far, still in County Meath, but very close to the border with Dublin, so I actually went to secondary school in Dublin. So we used to get called boggers because we were from the countryside. Did you,
you went to university where?
In Trinity College, Dublin. So I was there for 4 years.
Now, when you went to Trinity, when I was going to school in Ireland, that's a good many years ago, even before you were born, people almost had to get special permission to go to Trinity. That has all changed, hasn't it?
That's true, yeah. When my parents went to university, they went to University College Dublin, and hardly anybody who was a Catholic went to Trinity College. You had to get the Archbishop of Dublin to allow you to go, but that had completely gone. It's people from all religions and none going to Trinity.
Now, your career choice. Let me back up. What was your first job?
My very first, I suppose, proper job where I got a good salary was actually a summer job when I was 18. I went to Germany and I worked in a factory in Bayer, or Bayer you'd call it, so the people who do Bayer aspirin. I worked in a factory packing tablets for a whole summer.
What about the language barrier? Any?
Well, I had learned German, so when I went to university I initially did European studies and then I did history, so I already spoke German and French. Very bad German, but it improved a lot when I was there.
So how did the Foreign Service become your career?
Well, I started off very much on a European track. So before I joined the Foreign Ministry I lived in Germany, but after university I worked in Belgium and in Poland. I worked for the European Commission. So I was very interested in Europe and in our cooperation with Europe, but I found myself always wondering where Ireland fit in when there was a big negotiation, how Ireland had done. So I wanted to join the Foreign Ministry because I really enjoy being abroad and promoting Ireland, but I also like being at home. So this is the perfect job for me because when I get itchy feet at home I can go away, and when I start after a couple of years thinking, oh, it'd be nice to be back home, I can go back home.
Now, you did work in New York for a while too, didn't you?
Yeah, I was 5 years in New York.
And what was your job there?
I was at our mission to the United Nations, and I was our human rights and gender equality expert and negotiator.
So you probably saw Mary Robinson there.
I did, yes. In fact, we used to have her in for meetings, and I remember organising an event for her on my birthday, which was a Saturday. We had a meeting on preventing violence against women in conflict. And I remember she gave me a surprise present at the end of the day to thank me for giving up my birthday Saturday to help out.
And for those of our listeners that do not know who Mary Robinson is, she was the first female president of Ireland, wasn't she?
That's true, and it was very special for me because when I was at school, she was elected when I was 16, so I couldn't vote. I was too young to vote, but she came to our school and I presented her with a bouquet of flowers because we had a peace and justice group, so she came to speak to the school. And I would always have called her President Robinson, but when she was in New York, she was saying, "Oh, call me Mary," which is quite hard to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
You've looked up to someone your whole life and they've been your president.
You do know she's coming to Cleveland in May.
I didn't know that. She was in Illinois last month, but I did not know
she is. I believe she is being conferred with the doctorate of law at Cleveland State University.
She was a law professor when she started out at my university. She taught some of my colleagues.
That's right. But she will. I'm sure you may even have to come back for that. Huh?
It's never a hardship to come to Cleveland.
Okay. Talk to me about your job in Chicago as the consul.
Well, I'm the 21st Consul General of Ireland, so we've been based in Chicago since 1933, and I represent the Irish government and people to the US Midwest. So in 1933 they started off covering 20 states. I'm lucky I only have 12 to do. So we engage with politics, so with the governors and the congressmen, with the mayors, and local, state, federal administration in the Midwest. We of course engage with the Irish communities, strong Irish communities all over the Midwest. About between 11 and 14% of the population usually have some Irish connection. So we go to community events, media events, cultural events, and we also, a big part of our job is promoting trade connections between Ireland and the US. So it's probably well known to a lot of your listeners that Ireland's very successful at getting investment, and a lot of US companies have their European headquarters, or even their European, Middle East and Asia or Africa headquarters in Ireland. But also there's a lot of Irish companies invested in America, and there's employing, I think, almost 100,000 people.
Yes,
most of those are in the Midwest too.
Yeah, I believe Kerrygold, which
right.
we see everywhere in America, on every grocery store, every Sam's Club, Costco, Whole Foods, and I think they employ about 20,000 people in this country.
They have a huge operation here. In fact, Kerrygold is the brand, and I think they're the #3 butter in the US and the #1 cheese. So they've an extraordinary recognition and a great kind of strong brand from a very kind of natural produce. The only resource we have is rain in Ireland, but we put it to good use with grass and milk. But I've been out to visit their headquarters, which is just north of Chicago. It's in Evanston, and they have a big operation. And actually, we've done a lot of work with them to promote Ireland, the food island, because Kerrygold is probably the best known example in the US of quality Irish produce that's simple, fresh, sustainable produce.
Their world headquarters is in Tralee, is it? Or it's in Kerry still, I think.
Yeah, they grew out of the co-op, but they've quite an operation.
Massive company.
Yeah, I think they operate now, they'll correct me, it's in at least 90 countries, and it's probably actually much more than that.
I want to talk to you about the Irish economy, because it's kind of been the wonder of the world the past 7 or 8 years. The Celtic Tiger roared for 8 or 9 years, and then of course disaster hit the economy, took a dive, but it's back and it appears to be doing well. In fact, I read in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, 7% growth, probably the only one that's higher is China, and I don't think even China is high right now. Is that high? What has made this happen?
Well, there's kind of two stories, because there's the story of the rise up to the Celtic Tigers, so that in the 2000s we had an extremely successful economy, and for the first time in Irish history, unemployment was very low. Instead of the young Irish emigrating around the world, the people were coming in to live and work in Ireland, and a lot of that was to do with education, ensuring good quality education, having almost 50% of the young people having third level degrees. And it was
when you say third level, what do you mean by that?
So university level, university level qualifications. So that was a big part of the success story, and also trying to identify our strength, because I mentioned apart from rain we don't have a lot of natural resources, so we focused on certain industries on services, on technology, life sciences, pharma. So those were part of the big drivers for the success of the economy, and then that drove the domestic economy. But like in the US and many other parts of the world, we were hit very hard in 2007, 2008, and we had the worst recession of any developed country since the Second World War.
Wasn't that just like in America, attributable to the housing bubble?
Yeah, that was the key factor. And I was living in New York in 2007 when things started to go wrong in New York, and it quickly spread to Ireland. So it was a small sector of the economy that had grown too quickly and too large. And you had the subprime loans over here. We had a small number of people, property developers, taking out very big loans. The banks became involved, and the solvency of the banks was in question. So we ended up having to have a bailout, like a number of other countries in Europe. So that was a pretty difficult time, and it was the cuts and austerity we had to have really affected a lot communities all over Ireland, and was very difficult. And we saw emigration rising, people going to Australia and Canada especially, not to the US this time. And it was something that was very difficult, and we're not 100% out of it yet, but we have turned it around. And I think what was important is that we started to learn the lesson from the mistakes. Some of it was the international economy. We're the most globalized economy in the world. So if we joke, if America sneezes, Ireland catches a cold. But our economy is very connected to that of the United States. So if there are problems here, there are going to be problems in Ireland. So some of it was going to happen anyway, but the huge extent was also due to inadequate regulation. So we've had to fix that. But as you say, we're going to be the fastest growing in Europe next year, and we were this year, and last year as well. So
was I right about the 7%, or is it quite 7?
I think 6.8 is
Yeah,
one figure.
that's
Depends
close
which
enough.
year you're talking about.
That's close enough.
Yeah, no, it's an extraordinary figure.
How important is the participation of Ireland in the EU? How badly does Ireland need the EU?
It's a cornerstone for us. In fact, I was involved over the last 2 years with drawing up a new foreign policy for Ireland. So not just for our foreign ministry, but for the whole country. And we distilled down to 5 goals that we have, which are very simple: our people, our values, our prosperity, our place in Europe, and our influence. So the fact that our place in Europe is one of those 5 key goals shows you how close it is for us. And joining the European Union in 1973, so the year before I was born, I've always been a European citizen as well as an Irish citizen. It really allowed Ireland to grow and expand from being a kind of a small island, and the risks of being provincial when you're quite isolated. So it allowed us to learn from our European partners and to be treated as equals. And it really also helped to bring peace to Northern Ireland, and helped our relationship with the UK. And we now have a relationship of equals because we sit beside each other at the negotiating table in Europe. So I remember when I was 22, after university, I suppose my first job, I was an intern at the European Commission in Brussels. So I went off, and I didn't really know very much about the EU. On my first day, I was at the Environment Commission, and there were people in all different languages, been translated, Greek and Finnish, and the chairman of the committee was from Scotland, from Glasgow. He'd grown up working on the docks, and they were talking about regulation of tonnage and environmental regulation of certain materials, and there were a lot of arguments and different views. But it really struck me at that moment, Europe works. It actually works. And you have people from each country, and we all have common interests, and we have a globalising world economy. So from a European perspective, getting together, hashing out deals to help us, and not just economically, in terms of social Europe, in terms of employment standards, health standards, educational cooperation. So Europe has a lot of challenges, and a lot of the coverage internationally is on the negatives. But when you've actually worked at the ground level, it's transformed not just Ireland, but the whole continent, really.
What about Britain leaving the European Union, what will that do to Ireland, or will it do anything?
Our government is very concerned about that.
Aye.
We're very worried. There's been an economic study only, I think, the week before last, listing how the economic damage that it would do to every country in Europe. And apart from the UK itself, which would be the most affected, Ireland is the first. So
is it because of the huge trade deals you have with Britain?
Yeah, well, not even trade deals, because we don't need to do deals or AXA. You know, we've totally open economy, no tariffs, as no taxes, same through the entire of Europe. There's €1 billion a week crossing the Irish Sea in trade, so we are both very important trade partners for each other. It's very important for us in Ireland. If you want to export, the UK is the first place you go to. So economically it would have a huge impact. But also, it's not just economic. We're neighbour countries. We've a long and intertwined history. It's been a history that's difficult, as we all know, at many times. But the peace process in Northern Ireland has allowed the border in Ireland, you know, between Ireland and the north, to really be a border in name. You know, I was up in Belfast twice last year. You get on the train. I went up to see my cousin who lives there. There's no passport check, there's no border control. We have a common travel area with the UK. My husband's English, so I go see my in-laws a lot. My brother lives in Scotland, my sister lives in England. So, you know, that's just one story, but there's a huge amount of family and cultural connections between Ireland and the rest of the UK, be clear about that. And of course between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So to have an international European border with potentially border controls and everything that entails reintroduced on the island of Ireland would be a step in the wrong direction for us, and it would affect the economic recovery in Northern Ireland as well as on our side as well. So it's something we're very concerned about, and our Taoiseach, a Mayo man, who's a good Cleveland connection, he's spoken very, very frankly about it in the UK, and has said to people, you know, we'd prefer to have them stay in and stay with us.
Speaking of the Taoiseach, or the acting Taoiseach, I should say, right? That's what we have right now. Would you like to explain that to our listeners? There's a lot of controversy, not controversy, indecisiveness by the people of Ireland who they want to run the country, isn't there?
That's it's an interesting time. I mean, we had just had a general election. I know there's a general election going on here in the US. Our campaign was a little bit shorter than yours. The official campaign was 3 weeks long. And the results are that there's no obvious one party or collection of parties to go into government. So for the moment there is an acting government, so you're right, and Kenny is still the Taoiseach. So I can't run riot. I still have bosses and I still have a job of work to do.
And the one contestant is Michael Martin from Fianna Fáil, is that correct?
The two biggest parties are Fine Gael, which Enda Kenny is the leader of, and then Micheál Martin from Cork is the leader of Fianna Fáil. And Fine Gael is the biggest, and Fianna Fáil is slightly smaller. Yeah,
my dad, God rest his soul, would be turning over in his grave if he ever thought that Fianna Fáil was going to go into business with Fine Gael. He was a die-hard Fianna Fáil man, and of course a lot of his kids turned out to be Fine Gael people. That's
controversial.
That's politics.
That's politics.
So go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael grew out of the Civil War divide in Irish politics, and as this year is the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising, and we've had a whole series of commemorations, and I know you might want to talk about that a bit later. There's a discussion going on at home about whether is it time to end the Civil War divide. Obviously, not only am I not a politician, in fact in our line of work we're prevented from being members of political parties, so we're neutral, so we don't get involved in the detail, but of course we're watching with great interest. But it's, in fact, it has happened before after Irish elections that it has taken a bit of time for negotiations on who is going to be in the government, and you know, really on what their programme will be. So at the moment they're speaking, a lot of the parties and the independents are speaking about what they want to do over the next couple of years, what funding is available for which priorities, so which is, you know, fairly normal government formation discussion. So that's the stage that we're at the moment.
Ireland has changed a lot in 50 years. One of the ways I noticed it has changed is the diversity of the population. want to talk to me about that? Where are all the people? What's causing the diversity? Where are they coming from? What countries, etc.?
That's very true. Our population is almost 18%, 1/8.
Could I interrupt you here
foreign
for a
born.
minute? I want to tell you this. I was 12 years old, and I never told JC this, or Michael. I was 12 years old before I saw the first black person.
Yeah.
And he was a man from Africa that had come to the local horse show, and he was selling some kind of liniment that you put on your joints, and it cured everything. And he was a big giant of a man, but that was the first black person any of us in the village had ever seen.
Yeah, no, the Ireland I grew up in was very much like that. We had one girl in our school who was adopted from India, and which everybody was very fascinated again about, because we were all just from the local village and didn't really have any interesting connections.
So what has happened? What has brought this about?
Well, the change in the economy was a big part of it. So for the first time ever, instead of Irish people going all around the world, not just to the US, but nearly every country in the world, people started coming to Ireland. So for example, I worked in Poland 20 years ago, and when I worked in Warsaw, there were less than 100 Irish people in Warsaw, and there were about 150 Poles in Ireland. There are now 150,000 Poles in Ireland, and at one point there were 200,000.
I hear they have their own newspaper in Ireland.
They do, yeah, and it's great. I get homesick for Polish food, so there's a Sklep Polski Polish shops here and there, so I don't have to wait too long for my fix. But the economy grew, especially in construction, and needed workers. And the Eastern European countries joined the European Union, so there were jobs available. And there has always been some diversity in Ireland, especially in Dublin. So there's a wonderful group called Mixed Race Ireland, based in the UK, who are kind of telling the story that was a little bit hidden about more diversity in Ireland, even back in the 40s and 50s. But certainly the big numbers of people, and the biggest group are the Poles. The second biggest are from the UK, from England. We kind of don't notice them as much because there's been so much going over and back. There's also a large community from Lithuania in the Baltic states, from Nigeria, from China, and from all over the world. So they're the big community from the Middle East.
I suppose you could say the birth of the EU and the fall of the Soviet Union also had a lot to do with,
I think so, yeah, to the changes. And in
the
fact,
ripple effect from those events.
Yeah, and when the new countries joined the European Union in 2004, and in fact Ireland was the presidency of the European Union then, and our ambassador in Washington, Anne Anderson, she was the ambassador in Brussels, and in fact, incidentally, she was the first woman ambassador at the EU from any country, not just from Ireland, from any country. And when the new member states joined, so there were 25 member states, and she was chairing all their discussions. She was the only woman in the room of 25. But when they joined, only 3 countries, Sweden, Ireland and the United Kingdom, actually opened our borders for people to come and work. So the other countries had a transition. They waited 7 years for that. And in fact, it was a real benefit to Ireland, and a benefit, of course, to the people who came mainly from Poland, but also Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Slovakia as well. Because, you know, we needed people to come and work in Ireland, and they were there, and immigrants always tend to have a higher skill level than the local population, so we had, you know, well-educated people. You know, not everybody spoke English, but they learned very quickly. Many of them learned Irish and speak it better than some Irish people. But it's benefited the country, you know, just as when Irish people and the Irish Americans who came over the last 2 centuries and before came to America and got to know the Italian, the Jewish, the African American communities, the Hungarian communities. That kind of journey and experience is going on now in Ireland, and we're actually looking to our Irish American communities and how they integrated and got on with all the other groups here. I think there's 30 different immigrant groups in Cleveland, someone was telling me today. So
I think about 130.
130.
Yeah,
so 30 big
so.
Ones, but 130.
We have gardens for 42.
Oh,
and
yes.
I think if you go to a website called clevelandpeople.com,
yeah.
I think you'll see about 130 nationalities represented on that. A friend of ours, Debbie Hansen, set that up, clevelandpeople.com.
Oh,
and
I'll check
it's
it out.
all those nationalities are represented on that website.
On the website, yeah.
The education system, I want to talk about that just for a minute.
Sure.
How it has changed now. Obviously, the schools teach more languages than they used to teach, and and of course a lot of technology, I'm sure.
That's true. I mean, the schools, from independence, the schools always taught Irish, but often in a very technical, dry way.
Yeah.
So
I remember it well.
Yeah, my own father barely speaks Irish, and my mother, and he went to a school that was all in Irish when he started, so he still doesn't speak any. And my mother was raised through Irish and went to a school that was through English, so she's fluent in both, and we all have Irish through her. But when I was at school, the big change is that we teach other languages earlier, and also that people are more familiar with language. I mean, there was great even resentment of the Irish language from the way it was taught, and before people were more international, they didn't realise maybe the use of having different languages, but young Irish people now wouldn't have the level of languages that you see elsewhere in Europe where people are using them. But I mean, for myself, I learned French and German in school, and then obviously learned Polish when I lived in Poland.
If you do want to travel, like you did going to Poland, if you want to travel, you must learn the language.
Well, it makes it easier. In a way, we have a weakness that with English, because it's such an international language and so many people speak it, you can try and cruise by with only having English. But I found, especially in my job, even working at the United Nations and working when I worked in France, the Council of Europe, it was always through French and English. While everything is translated, you miss something if you're listening to the translation. And when you talk to people, if you talk to somebody in their own language, you connect at a deeper level and you avoid more misunderstandings and you understand a place more. So from having lived in both France and Belgium and speaking French, having lived in Germany and speaking German, and then when I went to Poland, I found Polish tough. It was about 4 months before I could even say a word or two, but I lived there for 2 years, and I've found it, I understood Polish people more when I spoke the language. And even now in Chicago, the odd time I get a Polish taxi driver or a Ukrainian, and they put me to work trying to remember what I can and have a bit of a conversation with them.
I want to go back to 1916. It's a big event in Irish history, 100 years since the 1916 rebellion. My father was 13 years old when the rebellion took place, and he often talked about it. But you're going to be busy probably the rest of the year.
Oh yes,
with the celebrations of that. Where's some of the big celebrations around America?
Well, we've already started.
In your
so
district,
we're right in the middle of it. I mean, there are 2,000 events in Ireland at least over the year, and in the US, we counted initially 200, but my colleagues in Washington say there must be at least 400, and there's probably a lot more. The biggest event is over 3 weeks in Washington at the Kennedy Center, and each day there's going to be cultural performances, concerts, readings, a lot of world-class performers from Ireland, so real celebration of Irish culture and heritage. In the Midwest, in Chicago, we just had our first big event, which you're having in Cleveland, I think you've had this week, which is the Notre Dame documentary on Easter 1916, on the rebellion. That was, the North American premiere was in Chicago, which we hosted a few weeks ago, 21st of March. On the 30th of March in Chicago, we're going to have an historian, Turtle Bunbury, who's written a new history of 1916, but also very much based on photographs. So he's going to talk people through the history through photographs. And then we're hoping to have another event in the fall as well. But every community, I've had letters from North Dakota, from Minnesota. I'm going to Detroit this week because there's a little known hero of 1916, Captain Robert Monteith, who was involved in the gun running in Bannistrand, so one of 3 people.
Roger Casement.
With Roger Casement, himself, Roger Casement, and another gentleman whose surname now, of course, I've forgotten. But actually, Robert Monteith had been in the British Army for 10 years, so he had more military knowledge than Casement. So he did a lot of the practical work behind the scenes, and he certainly would have been executed if he was caught, but he escaped to the United States. He was in New York, and he ended up in Detroit. He worked for the Ford Company, and when he died in 1956, the Ford Company sent a Lincoln car and a chauffeur from Detroit down to Chicago to bring my predecessor up to Detroit for his funeral, to ensure he had the full honour. And the story kind of came full circle because we had Jimmy Deenan, the Minister for the Irish Abroad, for the diaspora, over in the US 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago for St. Patrick's Day. And we went up to Detroit and we visited the graveside, and we just had a moment there. We laid some flowers and said an Ar Neathair, which is the Our Father in Irish, to honour Captain Monteith. So it's interesting. The connections between Ireland and the US related to 1916, a lot of them are very well known and documented, but this is a new one that a lot of us didn't know about, that we're just learning more about.
Did I ask you about how many children you had?
You didn't? No.
Oh, and I think you do have a husband, I know.
I do, yeah,
and?
Dan. And 2 boys, Connor and Killian. So
how old?
Connor's 5 and Killian is 2.
I bet Mom gets a great welcome when she comes back from her journeys.
Oh, I do, yeah. I get
where's the presents?
Well, they have to be good now to get the present. You'll have to advise me what a good present from Cleveland would be.
Well, he's a 5-year-old. He's probably getting into baseball now, maybe starting a bit. Yeah, he'll probably
watching the basketball as well.
And the basketball, yeah, LeBron James jersey, maybe something like that.
That might be a good
Orla,
choice.
our guest today is Orla McBreen. She's the Consul General of Ireland, representing the Midwest Division here in the United States, and I'm so delighted that you made it to our radio station, WHK, and I hope it's the first of many visits. Now, your predecessor made Cleveland his second home.
That's
you know
true,
that.
he told me, yeah.
Aidan Cronin, and we hope you do the same thing.
Oh, thank you.
You're always welcome here. We have a lot of events going on all the time, and we don't just celebrate the Irish around St. Patrick's Day, we do it all year round.
That's true. Well, the fact that I was here in October and in April now is testament to
And
that.
I'm hoping you're back again the 15th of October. We're going to invite you. We'll send you the formal invitation soon for October the 15th.
Thank you. I'm glad it's the 15th because it was the 10th
last year.
10-10-10 is my son's birthday.
Oh.
So I had to engage in some subterfuge to get up here.
Okay.
So it's not clashing with his birthday, so that's good.
Well, thank you, Orla, for taking the time to be with us today. And again, I hope it's the first of many visits. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Gurmila Mahaguts.
Gurmila Mahagut also to you.
Slán.